Doran counted the bodies by lantern light because daylight was still an hour away and the smoke made it hard to see. 7, 8. He stopped at 9 when he recognized the boots. He had cobbled those boots himself 3 winters ago from leather he bartered off a southbound trader. Good boots, solid at the ankle, reinforced at the toe. He had been proud of them, and his son Pell had complained they were too stiff for 2 weeks before they broke in and became the best boots he had ever owned. Pell was 17. He had been wearing those boots when the dragon came through the valley. Doran did not cry. He had already done that somewhere between the tree line and the first collapsed wall. What was left now was something quieter and heavier. He stood in the ruins of Callows Bend with his lantern and his grief, and after a long time he set the lantern down in the ash and got to work. There was no one else to do it. He was a mechanic by trade, the only one in 3 villages. He fixed mill wheels and ox cart axles and iron latches on grain house doors. He understood things that broke and how to put them back together, or if they could not be put back together, how to make use of the pieces. He buried the dead over 2 days. He was 49, with a bad knee from a cart accident 6 years back. By the end of the 2nd day, he could barely walk. He buried Pell last, in the meadow behind where the house had stood, beside Sira's grave from 2 years prior. He said nothing because nothing he could say felt like enough, and he had always believed silence was more honest than the wrong words. Then he went back to the ruins and started building. Not a new home, a forge first, inside the one stone wall still standing from the old grain house. Scorched beams, bent iron fittings, an intact chimney from a collapsed kitchen. 3 weeks later, a second chimney rose from the old mill house. 2 people from the settlement near the eastern pass arrived without announcement. A woman named Calla and her older brother Wit. They had found their own ruins and made the same choice. Calla knocked on the grain house doorframe, which had no door, and said they needed tools and had their own hands and knew how to use them. Doran looked at them for a moment, then stepped aside. That was how Callows Bend became something again, not through any plan, but through the stubborn gravity that pulls people back to places they have lost. They worked without much talk. The forge grew, the mill wheel was repaired and running by the end of the month. A blacksmith named Oswald arrived from 2 valleys east with his tools on his back, missing 2 fingers from a forge accident in his youth, and he could work iron in ways that made Doran stop and watch. 4 became 6, 6 became 9. None of them spoke about the dragon directly. It was understood that everyone in Callows Bend had a version of the same story. Different faces, same fire. The dragon had not targeted any of them especially. It had simply passed through. That was what made it hard to carry, not that they had been chosen, but that they had not even been worth choosing. They were just in the way. On the 47th morning after Doran buried his son, he heard a sound from the field outside. Not wind, not an animal. He took his heaviest iron bar and walked out. The dragon was young, not small, still 3 times the size of an ox, with a wingspan that would have cleared the mill roof, but young in the face. It was huddled against the collapsed barn wall with its left wing folded at the wrong angle. Its scales were the dull grey-green of something that had not eaten well. There was a quality to it Doran did not expect and had no name for. It looked ashamed. He stood in the dark field holding an iron bar, looking at a young dragon sitting in the rubble of a village another dragon had destroyed, as if it had nowhere else to go. After a long time, Doran said, "You're blocking the water channel." The dragon stared at him. "Move left about 4 feet, and I can get past you to the morning checks." The dragon moved, left 4 feet. Doran walked past it, cleared a stick jammed against the channel lever, and walked back. At the workshop door he paused. "There's space in the far corner of the grain house if you need shelter," he said, without turning around. "Roof holds." He went inside. The dragon did not follow, but when Doran checked an hour later, it had moved from the barn wall to the grain house corner and was sitting with its back against the stone, watching the valley lighten. It was still there at noon, and at dusk, and the next day. Doran did not know the dragon's name was Vale. or that it had been cast out by its own flight for being too small, too broken, too insufficient to keep. He did not know that Vale had flown 4 days on a damaged wing looking for anywhere that would not turn it away. He did not know any of this. But he had left the corner open, and in Doran's experience, that was usually how things began. The wing was the problem. Doran had known it from the first morning, but knowing and doing are different things, and for the first week he did neither. He fed Vale, not out of warmth, out of habit. A hungry creature in a small space is a dangerous creature, and Doran was practical above all else. He left dried meat and river fish near the grain house door each morning without ceremony, the same way he left water in the channel trough for Oswald's old mule. Vale ate without acknowledgement. That suited Doran fine. The others were less certain. Calla asked about the dragon on the 3rd morning, standing in the workshop doorway with her arms crossed, and the particular expression she wore when she had already decided something and was waiting for someone to argue with her. "It's not ours," Doran said, without looking up from the axle fitting he was grinding. "It's in our grain house. Corner of the grain house." "That's not an answer." "It's a young dragon with a damaged wing that has nowhere else to be," Doran said. "If it wanted us dead, we'd know by now." Calla was quiet for a moment. "Wit thinks we should run it off." "Wit can go talk to it then." Wit did not go talk to it. The dragon Vale, though none of them knew that yet, stayed in the corner and watched. It watched everything. Doran noticed this the way he noticed things he might later use. The dragon's eyes tracked the work going on in the forge, followed the path of the repaired mill wheel turning in the channel, rested on the new wall section Oswald was raising with salvaged stone. It was not the dull watching of an animal. It was the watching of something that was trying to understand. On the 8th day, Doran put down his tools and walked to the grain house corner. He crouched near the damaged wing without touching it, close enough to see the structure properly. The left wing's primary bone, the long spar that ran from shoulder to wingtip, was fused at the wrong angle. Not broken, fused, grown wrong or healed wrong at some point, so that the wing could not open to its full extension. When the dragon tried to spread it, the spar stopped 2/3 of the way out, and the whole membrane bunched uselessly at the fold. Doran turned his head sideways to look at the joint from a different angle. Then he stood, went back to his workbench, and started drawing. Not a plan, not yet, just lines, the shape of the joint, the angle it was stuck at versus where it needed to be, the length of the spar, the way the membrane attached along the trailing edge. He had no understanding of dragon anatomy. He had a thorough understanding of levers, joints, load-bearing angles, and what happened when a structural element was fixed at the wrong position. He drew for 2 hours. Vale watched him from the corner the entire time. Eventually, Doran held the drawing up, facing the dragon. "You see this?" he said. Vale looked at the drawing. "The bone is set wrong. I can't fix the bone, but I might be able to build something that does what the bone won't." He paused. "Do you understand me?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, in a voice that was rough and low and clearly unused to the shape of human words, the dragon said, "Some." Doran nodded. He had suspected. Dragons that raided human settlements heard human speech constantly. Young ones picked up pieces whether they meant to or not. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "The wing?" Vale was quiet for longer this time, as if the question was harder than the words. "Not the wing," it finally said. Doran understood what that meant. He looked back at his drawing. "I'm going to need measurements," he said. "I'll need to get close. I'll need you to hold still." Vale said nothing, which Doran took as agreement. He spent the next 2 days measuring every dimension of the wing, the spar, the shoulder joint. The span of the membrane when the wing was extended as far as it could go. He used a length of knotted rope for the longer spans and his caliper for the close joints. Vale held still, not perfectly. Once it flinched hard when Doran pressed near the joint itself, and for one very long second Doran was aware of how large the dragon's head was relative to his own. But Vale controlled it, pulled the flinch back, and held still again. "Thank you," Doran said, when he finished the second day's measurements. Vale looked at him with an expression Doran could not fully read, something uncertain in it. Why, Vale said, the word was not a challenge, it was a real question. Doran thought about it. He had asked himself something similar over the past 8 days. Why feed it? Why measure it? Why spend 2 hours drawing instead of doing any of the dozen other tasks waiting for him? Because it's a problem I think I can solve, he said at last, and I've run out of the ones I can't. He went back to his workbench. Oswald was watching from the far side of the forge, saying nothing, which was how Oswald expressed most things. Calla had stopped asking. Wit had started leaving an extra portion of fish near the grain house door in the mornings, which he would have dennied if asked. In the corner of the grain house, Vale folded its good wing over its bad one and watched the mechanic work, and did not ask any more questions. It was learning that some answers only came in the shape of things being built. The first brace broke on the third test. Not dramatically, it simply gave at the central pin joint with a flat crack, and the whole left side dropped, and Vale landed hard on the stone yard with the useless iron frame dangling from its shoulder harness. It sat there for a moment, then it looked at Doran. Doran was already walking toward it with his jaw set and his hand out for the broken piece. He had built the first version in 6 days, working before dawn and after dusk, when the light from the forge was his only company. An external frame fitted over the damaged wing, iron struts following the line of the primary spar, held at the correct angle by a main bar, with leather cuffs at 3 points to anchor it to the wing membrane and shoulder. The idea was simple. The bone couldn't extend. The iron would extend for it, hold the wing open at the right angle so the membrane could catch air. Simple in theory. In practice, the weight distribution was wrong, and the pin joint at the main elbow could not handle the torsion of an actual flight stroke. He took the broken piece back to the workshop and started on the second version. Oswald helped this time without being asked. He appeared at Doran's elbow the second morning and began drawing his own lines on the workbench beside Doran's, and they worked in their shared language of angles and load points without speaking much at all. Oswald had built mine-cart frames in his youth. He understood torsion. He suggested a double-ring joint at the elbow instead of a single pin, which would allow rotation in 2 directions instead of 1. The second version lasted 4 tests before the shoulder cuff tore through. Doran replaced the leather with iron rings lined with a strip of boiled hide, which was softer than raw metal against scale but held its shape under pressure. He redesigned the shoulder anchor to distribute the load across 3 attachment points instead of 1. The third version held for 11 tests. Then Vale pushed the wing into a banking turn on the 12th, and the main bar bent 3 degrees out of true under the lateral force. Doran stared at the bent bar for a very long time. Then he put it in the forge and started hammering it thicker. Vale found him still at the forge 2 hours later, past midnight. The dragon stood in the workshop doorway, too large to come inside, and watched. After a while it said, "You do not stop." "No point stopping," Doran said, without looking up. "The other humans," Vale said carefully, "they say you were a different man before." Doran set his hammer down. He picked up the bar, checked its straightness against the edge of the anvil, and put it back in the fire. "Did they?" "The woman Calla, she said you used to laugh." Vale paused. "She says she has not heard you laugh since the burning." Doran pulled the bar from the fire and hit it 4 times in quick succession. The sound rang off the stone walls and died. "What's your name?" he asked. He had never asked before. "Vale." "Where did you come from, Vale?" A long pause. "The northern flight cast me out. My wing was always wrong. I was too small. They said I was not worth the feeding." The words came out flat and practiced, like something repeated so many times it had lost its pain, except it had not quite. "I flew until I could not, and then I found this place." Doran looked at the bar in the tongs. "And you stayed. You did not drive me off." "I didn't drive off the last wounded thing that wandered into my yard either," Doran said. "It was a 3-legged dog. Oswald ended up namming her. She's somewhere around here." Vale was quiet for a moment. Then, with something Doran might have called dry if he had been more certain about dragon expressions. "I am not a dog." "No," Doran agreed. "Dogs don't complain about workmanship." He thought he heard something then, not quite a sound, more the absence of the held tension that usually came from Vale's direction. He did not look up to check. He built the fourth version with the thicker main bar, a double shoulder anchor, Oswald's two-ring elbow joint, and one addition of his own, a release catch at the shoulder, so that if the brace took more force than it could handle, it would fail at the catch and come free cleanly rather than tearing through the membrane on its way off. The 14th test happened on a grey morning with low wind. Vale ran the length of the stone yard, opened both wings, the good one full, the iron-braced one stuttering open, and then catching on the frame, holding and lifted. It was not graceful. It was heavy and tilted, and the left side compensated with too much force so the right dipped. But it was flight. 60 feet, 80, a wide low banking circle over the mill and the forge rooftops, and then a landing that was more controlled fall than touchdown, ending with Vale sitting in the field with both wings folded and its chest heaving. Callows was standing at the field's edge. She had not said she was coming to watch. She had simply appeared. Nobody said anything. Then Wit, standing behind his sister, said quietly, "It worked." The word hung in the cold morning air. Doran walked out to check the brace fittings, every joint intact, release catch untriggered, main bar true. He looked up at Vale. How did it feel? Vale looked at the sky it had just come back from. "Like something that should have always been possible," it said. Doran nodded and went back to the workshop to write down what he would change in the 5th version. Oster arrived on a Tuesday, dropping out of the clouds with the particular silence that large things can manage when they do not want to be heard early. He landed in the open field outside Callows Bend and stood with his wings folded and waited, which told Doran more than he wanted to know. A dragon that wanted violence did not wait. A dragon that waited was making a statement. Doran came out of the workshop with his iron bar. He did not bring it as a weapon. He brought it because his hands needed something in them when his heart was beating like that. Oster was old. The scar tissue along his left jaw ran in 3 parallel lines, old enough to have gone pale. His scales were a deep charcoal grey with the slight shine of a creature that had never gone without eating. He was twice Vale's size and moved with the absolute certainty of something that had never in its life been questioned. He did not look at Doran at all. "Vale," he said, in a voice so low it was almost below hearing, speaking in dragon tongue. Vale had come out of the grain house when the shadow fell. It stood now in the yard between Doran and Oster, and Doran could see, from behind, that it had straightened, that it was trying to take up more space than it had. They spoke for a time in the dragon tongue. Doran understood nothing but the shape of it, the flatness in Oster's voice, the way Vale's answers came shorter and then stopped coming at all. Then Vale turned to Doran and said, in rough common, "He was sent by the Flight Lord, Cruven. He says I am an embarrassment. That word has reached the courts, a cast-out flying on iron tools built by humans." Vale paused. "He says I am to go. He says you are to stop what you are doing." Doran looked at Oster. "What happens if Vale doesn't go?" Vale translated. Oster answered. "He says what happens is not something he needs to describe," Vale said quietly. Doran thought about Pell's boots. He thought about the 9 bodies he had counted by lantern light. He thought about the drawing he had made of a wing joint on the day he decided to try, and every version of the brace after it, and the morning Vale had lifted off the stone yard and come back down shaking. He stepped forward until he was standing beside Vale. Oster finally looked at him. "Tell him," Doran said, "that I've already lost everything I was afraid to lose. That changes what a person's willing to do." Vale translated. Oster listened. Something in the elder dragon's face shifted, not softening, but recalibrating, the way a calculation adjusts for a new number. He spoke again. "He asks if I chose this," Vale said. The dragon's voice had changed slightly. He asks if the human built the brace for me or if I asked for it. What did you tell him? I told him that the human asked nothing of me and expected nothing, that he saw a thing broken and could not leave it that way. Vale paused. Oster calls this weakness. Does he, Doran looked at the old dragon, ask him how many things he's built? Vale translated. Oster's eyes narrowed. The elder dragon's answer was short. He says dragons do not build, Vale said. They take, they rule. Building is what lesser things do when they cannot take. Yes, Doran said, it is. The silence after that lasted long enough to feel like a third presence in the yard. Calla had appeared at the workshop door, Oswald behind her, Wit at the millhouse corner. None of them had a weapon, none of them moved. They simply stood in the places they had built things and looked at the dragon who had come to tell them to stop. Oster looked at them, all of them. His gaze moved from face to face with the slow deliberateness of someone counting or measuring. Then he spoke to Vale again, a longer passage this time, and Vale's expression changed as it came. When Oster finished, Doran said, "What did he say?" Vale was quiet for a moment. He said Cruven's order was to return with proof you are gone or proof you are dead. A beat. He said he will return and tell Cruven he found an abandoned ruin. No humans, no dragon. Doran stared at him. Why? Vale looked uncertain, which was not an expression that came easily to a dragon. I asked him that as well. And he said that in his life he has broken many things. He has broken them because he was ordered to and because he was able to. He said he has never before stood in front of something being made and been asked to destroy it. Vale met Doran's eyes. He said he does not know what to do with that, so he will do nothing. Oster spread his wings. He did not say anything else. He looked at the brace on Vale's left wing for a moment, just looked at it, the iron glinting in the flat afternoon light, and then he was gone, climbing without a word into the low clouds from which he had come. The yard was very quiet. Wit let out a long breath from the millhouse corner. Calla made no sound at all, but her knuckles on the door frame had gone white. Doran lowered his iron bar. He'll tell someone eventually, Oswald said from behind Calla. It was the most words he had said at once in 3 weeks. Yes, Doran said, he will. He looked at the clouds where Oster had vanished. So we'd better be ready when they come back. He went inside to start planning. They came 3 weeks later, in the hour before dawn, and there were 4 of them. Doran had not slept much since Oster left. A traveler the previous morning had mentioned dragon wings above the northern passes, worth noting, worth losing sleep over. Calla had the watch on the eastern ridge. When the first shape cleared the cloud line, she lit the signal fire. When the glow went up, everyone moved. Not because they had military training or weapons worth namming. They moved because Doran had spent 3 weeks making a plan from what was available. You looked at what you had. You looked at what the problem was. You figured out how the two might meet. The gorge to the west was the key. A stone canyon 50 feet deep, walls closing to 12 feet at the narrowest point. He had measured it the week Oster left, walking the floor with a rope. He spent the following week driving iron anchor posts into the canyon walls at specific heights, with Oswald helping and Wit complaining until Doran quietly explained what the posts were for. Wit stopped complaining. Between the posts ran cables, salvaged haulage wire, retensioned and secured. Not a net. Doran was not trying to catch a dragon. A dragon at combat speed in a 12-foot passage cannot arrest its descent in time. Too much mass, not enough room. The cables did not need to hold the weight. They needed to break a dive angle, interrupt commitment, force a scramble. A dragon scrambling inside a 12-foot canyon had a serious problem. Vale led them in. When the 4 came low over the valley, 2 circling wide, 2 dropping fast, Vale went up. Not to fight. Doran had been very clear, and Vale had agreed, though the night before there had been a conversation where Vale argued that running felt wrong. Doran said he did not care what it felt like. He cared what it accomplished. The brace had never worked better. 6 weeks of refinement in every joint. Vale banked into the gorge entrance at speed, and the two combat dragons followed without hesitation. It had not occurred to whoever gave them orders that the cast-out on the human-made wing frame would choose somewhere that punished size. The first clipped the canyon wall at the narrowing. Wingtip on stone, the crack of it rising from the gorge like a broken branch, and the left side dropped, and the dragon went down hard onto the floor. Alive, not fighting. The second saw the cables and pulled straight up into the rock ceiling. At the ruins, the other two arrived. This was the part of the plan Doran had solved least. What he had was everything in its place. The forge burned at full heat. The mill turned. When the two dragons descended, they found not prey in open ground but people mid-task, moving with the calm of those who know where every tool is. One dragon put a foot through the forge roof. Oswald threw a full ladle of molten iron at its face from 3 feet away. The heat drove it back. Oswald was already moving. The second dragon knocked over the unfinished wall section. Calla had been moved from that spot 10 minutes before. Doran had looked at the wall and decided it would be the first target. She came out of the grain house, holding the 3-legged dog under one arm, and looked at the dragon over the rubble with no particular expression. Then Vale came back out of the gorge. Iron brace catching the early grey light, hitting the second dragon across the back before it could lift. Not enough to do serious harm, but down it went, face into the yard mud, and Doran pulled the signal cord strung from the workshop door to the eastern ridge. The answering fire rose on the hill, the agreed sign to the nearest settlement, come. Both dragons at the ruins looked at the signal fire, looked at Vale circling, looked at each other. They left. Doran sat on the workshop step with his bad knee aching and his hands still shaking, and let the silence settle back over Callows Bend. Oswald appeared with a burned sleeve. The 3-legged dog made her way through the rubble and lay down at Doran's feet. Forge roof needs patching, Oswald said. I know, Doran said. Vale landed and folded its wings. The iron brace clicked as it settled. Well, Vale said. Well, Doran agreed. The settlement folk arrived within the hour. 7 of them, carrying farm tools and the expressions of people who had decided they were tired of being afraid. Doran showed them the gorge, the cables, the anchor posts still solid in the walls. Their leader, a broad woman named Helda, walked the full length without speaking and came back with the look of someone whose understanding of something had just shifted. You built this, she said. We built it, Doran gestured at the ruins, at the people in them, all of us. Helda looked at Vale across the yard, and the dragon. The dragon is part of why it works, Doran said. Something that's supposed to be weak, flying where stronger things can't follow. Turns out that's worth something. Helda nodded slowly. There are 4 more settlements between here and the pass, all of them burned at least once, all still there. Doran looked at her. You could come talk to them, she said. Show them what you built. Doran thought about 9 bodies and a lantern, and the silence of a valley that should have gone quiet. He thought about a young dragon with nowhere left to go, and what it had cost to stay, and what it had become. Give us a day to patch the forge roof, he said, then we'll come. The word spread the way words always spread through places that have been hurt. Slowly at first, from mouth to mouth, along roads not well kept, and then all at once. By the time Doran and Vale had visited the 4 settlements east of the pass, a 5th had sent its own messenger to find them. By the time they reached the 5th, a delegation from 2 villages further south had already arrived at Callows Bend asking to see the gorge. Calla handled them. She was better at it than Doran, who answered questions with fewer words than people found comfortable. The idea traveled faster than they did. It was not complicated. That was part of why it moved. You found your gorge, your narrow place, your canyon, your terrain advantage, the specific geography of your valley that large things could not navigate well. You measured it. You drove anchor posts. You ran cables. You learned your land the way the dragons had never bothered to, because dragons had always taken what they wanted from the air and never needed to understand the ground below them. This was what humans had always had. They just had not, until now, organized it into something with cables and angles and a tested plan behind it. The dragon courts heard about it within a month. Doran knew this because a scout was spotted over Callows Bend twice in a single week, circling high and not descending. He tracked the direction it came from and the direction it left. He added it to his growing set of notes. Vale brought news too. In the months since the fight in the gorge, its common tongue had become fluid enough for real conversation rather than careful fragments, and it had begun making its own flights, not far, not long, the brace limiting sustained distance, but far enough to cross paths with other dragons passing through the region. Most ignored it. One stopped. The one who stopped was young and female and had come from the eastern coast flights, which were different in culture from the northern ones. She landed in the field outside Callows Bend without announcement, looked at the iron brace on Vale's wing, looked at the rebuilt workshop, and then looked at Doran. "You built that," she said, in common that was cleaner than Vale's had ever been. "Yes," Doran said. "It works. It's been tested." She walked around Vale slowly, examining the brace from every angle. Then she said, "My flight has a young one, born with one eye. They say it will never hunt well enough to stay." She paused. "They haven't decided what to do with it yet." Doran looked at her. "What's your name?" "Nessa." "What do you want, Nessa?" She looked at the forge, at the mill, at the people working in the yard without looking up, because they had learned, over these months, that dragons in the yard did not necessarily mean stopping work. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I wanted to see it with my own eyes before I decided." She stayed for 3 days. She asked Oswald questions about the forge. She watched Doran work. She did not talk to Vale much, but on the second evening they sat together on the ridge above the gorge as the sun went down and Vale pointed out the cable placements below. From what Doran could see from the workshop door, Nessa asked several questions. On the third morning, she left. She came back 6 weeks later with the one-eyed young dragon, which was named Prue, and was terrified of everything and knocked over a water barrel within 10 minutes of arriving. No one made any note of it. Oswald righted the barrel. Calla showed Prue where the water came from. Wit, who had become the person at Callows Bend, most likely to explain things patiently, sat with Prue for an hour near the mill and described how the wheel worked. Doran watched all of this from the workshop without contributing. He was working on a problem with the brace release catch, the mechanism that let it fail clean rather than tear, and he wanted to finish his current line of thought before he lost it. The Dragon Court sent an official messenger 4 months after the Gorge fight, not soldiers this time, a messenger which meant they were trying a different approach. The message was addressed to the settlement of Callows Bend, which was a thing that had not existed 6 months ago and now apparently needed to be addressed officially. The message said, the courts were aware of the construction projects in the valley passes. The courts requested, the word was requested, that the humans present themselves for a formal conversation regarding territorial protocols. Doran read it twice. Then he passed it to Calla, who read it twice, and then to Vale, who read it once and then looked at Doran with an expression that had a great deal in it. "They've never requested anything from humans before," Vale said. "I noticed that word too," Doran said. "What will you say?" Doran set the message down on the workbench beside the brace component he had been working on before the messenger arrived. He picked up his file and went back to the release catch. "I'll say we are willing to talk," he said, "when we've finished the spring cables on the southern pass." Vale watched him work. After a moment, "You're not going to make this easy for them." "No," Doran said, "but I'll make it fair." He turned the piece in his hands and checked the action of the catch. "That's more than they ever gave us." Outside, Prue was learning how the mill wheel worked, and the day's work was continuing, and in Callows Bend, that was enough. It was, in fact, everything.